at the same time the rigor of running a charity, even a small charity, like a small business. So it's, again, it's quite complicated, but it is a dynamic, let's say, equilibrium that we try to achieve.
And thanks for that. I just wanted to take up a little bit about, Nick, you said about the difference in local organizations, their accountability, diaspora, and maybe internationals. In our research, and we've done localization studies in 10 countries, and we have regular conversations with local CSOs and NGOs and others, what comes out is actually sometimes they're held to higher accountability because they're from the people. If something goes wrong, they will be at your doorstep, demanding accountability. Same with diaspora. I know, for example, my family, and when we've done some work, if something goes wrong, they will come to my father and say, what happened? You chase and you try and recover, right? So there's that different level of accountability. And what they say is with internationals, because they're far away, they can come and they can go, and it's not the same, they can't hold them to account as they can local organization diaspora, because diaspora have that connection and community. So there's that also that comes into play as well. And sometimes we don't recognize that. And I think, Nick, what you were saying, some of these formalized things that we have, mechanisms and things, they don't look at them in the same way, and they don't have resources to have those kind of mechanisms. So that's another, issue in terms of the way we practice the standards and accountability. Because if you have the right funding, then you can practice quality. But if you don't have right funding, resources, and others, then it's very hard to follow that. Paddy, any last thoughts on this?
I'm just thinking about, for me then it's a bit of a, thinking about how do we monitor impact? How do we evaluate? How do we look at impact, right? Impact assessment. And I think that for local organizations, you've got different things happening. I think for diaspora, depending also on who we're talking about in the diverse world of diaspora, even from a family perspective, that's why I started with the example of my sister, where if my grandmother calls and says the bridge in the village has collapsed, now that immediately means that organize yourselves because the bridge has collapsed. So that's the message you receive. And you know that financial contributions have to go forward. And it's a given that we are just sending forth. So there's not a lot of questions of, what about what happened last season? Who built it? Should we talk to the contractor who did it? Why didn't he do a good job? And so on. Because it's a demand that's coming from the most senior level in the family. And that's very important. Where does the information come from? Whereas my sister, 10 years younger than me, would say, can we talk about how we're going to construct this bridge this time around? So we need to have, and these days everybody can be a Zoom meeting, including my grandmother. Can we talk about grandma? And it's very interesting conversation to see between generations, because we would just say, okay, so what do we need to do? And she would say, well, hold on, before we go, I just wanted to find out who's constructing the bridge. Well, the same guy from the neighborhood, well, I don't think we should be doing that, because I don't think he did a good job last year. So for me, then, bringing this from a very micro example to the other way around, whether, so whoever is financing, how has, first of all, capacity been built into that local space to make sure that we have results that are sustainable? And therefore, when you act, whether it's in a development space or whether it's a humanitarian need that is at the doorstep, there's a lot of questions that come in, that should come in before in the design phase. So in the same way that my sister questions how we're going to look at it in the design phase, those are the kind of questions that need to go. International organizations, diaspora, to say, do you have the capacity to monitor what we are looking for? But then the other way as well is to say, if there is a need, are we listening to the members of the community? For some who are in the audience, when we were younger, we would carry our old clothes to the village. When you go to visit in the village when you're coming from the city. Today, when you go to the village, nobody needs your old clothes because clothes are already there. But before, people would just receive them because it was sort of, you were handed over, and if there was an emergency, they would just receive things on their doorstep without anybody having asked, what did you actually need for the crisis that's here or for the need which is here. So a lot is also coming out from the local community to say, actually, you know what, thanks for your old clothes, but what we need is education, or what we need is these are the things that are needed. So I also think that there's a lot of intentional listening that's happening from the diaspora all the way from where they are into the homelands, into what the needs are. But I think we also need to involve people in that design phase, so they're just not on the receiving end, but really being seen as part of the solution.
Great, thank you for that. And I just, last one that I am very passionate about, because, and I told you earlier, we have these labels, right, in India about NRI, and it comes with connotation, because we come with power and privilege, right? And how we act in our own communities, it's so important, and that also leads to accountability or not. So what are your experiences in having to work, because there's a bit of work to be done in the way we go in there to help. And I'm talking about us as diaspora, but also the internationals as well, right here. What are your thoughts on that? Because we are a bit privileged, where we are. We've had a good education. There's lots resources that are available that are not available in the local landscape. So, Cinzia.
I mean, we have been extremely lucky, because everywhere where we have done work, the only thing we receive is just thanks and blessings. We keep receiving emails from videos of little children that we are keeping in schools. I mean, it really is a great. I don't have the experience, but I know of people who have been perceived as having, again, another agenda. I know, for example, one of the most prominent NGOs, Venezuelan NGOs, Humanitarian, that the leader aims to be the next Minister of Health. Well, I personally think that for whatever reason, I'm not so sure what's the formula, but those who are at the receiving end of our work know that we have no further agenda but just to help. I mean, we're not aiming at a humanitarian career. We're not aiming at going back to Venezuela and be political leaders for the no. We really just want to help. And I guess that transpires. And one thing we try to avoid is also personalizing success. So, for example, we have tried to avoid any possible form of, okay, this is the success of this person, of that person. We're just, all together. So I think that probably has helped us to be able to be accepted, and we are really. It's a little bit like what Paddy say. They ask us. They explain what their needs are. We don't impose their needs. And actually, we had a very strange experience recently. We discovered that one of the doctors that we were sending some medical supplies, she had to take those medical supplies somewhere else because it was not her. She's an endocrinologist, pediatrician endocrinologist, so she treats children with diabetes. Just a short anecdote. And we discovered, but why you didn't tell us that you cannot use this in your hospitals? I said, because you are so generous. We didn't want to, so you really need to encourage them to. It's very important to keep, and we have been working with her for 2 years now, so we need to really engage. And I think that's also an element that they see. So they see lack of personalization, lack of, zero further agenda, political agenda, and a real desire to meet their needs.
Thank you for bringing that in about, sometimes they're reluctant to say because, it's like feeding the, biting the hand that feeds you. Sometimes it's, it's impolite in cultures as well. Any last thoughts, Paddy? And then we're going to open up for questions and answers.
I was also just thinking in terms of when we talk about financing, I think we often we look at obviously international organizations stepping in with a lot of resources and mechanisms and sometimes also helping, particularly on the advocacy side, particularly where diaspora haven't found the space to engage on a systems change in a particular context. But then I was also thinking about how we don't put a price to the costs that are there in terms of diaspora engagement. Diaspora, a lot working as volunteers. Diaspora giving of their times, opening their homes, using their own resources, things that we never often do not count. And in international organizations, you'd have actually people paid to do these kind of works, coordination and things like that, and how that, I think, is an important non-financial contribution that needs to often remain recognized. And not to say that, of course, some of it could be monetized, and I certainly do think some of it should be monetized, but some of it wants to remain the way it is. And I think that's important, but the recognition, the visibility of it remains very important. But then I was also just thinking about how the opportunity for crisis helps particularly the younger diaspora, not just to engage with the homeland, but also to learn from the homeland. Because I think it's in places where there is crisis, it's in places where they find themselves engaging. We're seeing more and more, for instance, initiatives that come up where younger diaspora would like to go and engage back at home and say, well, maybe it's post-crisis. Usually it would be post-crisis, or sometimes even in the middle of the crisis, but also how can they help and how can they engage? So I also wanted to talk about how we should be quite intentional about engaging newer diaspora, or also finding much more innovative ways to engage, so that everything is not really centered around a big machinery, an international organization, but an international space that involves diaspora in all its diversity, from those who are involved from a religious point of view, from religious organizations, but also going all the way to professional organizations. How do they want to engage? How do they want to bring in their resources and help? So just because we can't put a price on it, we shouldn't be able to see the cost, and most definitely we shouldn't underestimate what its impact would be.
Thank you. Thank you, Paddy.
Yeah, just one thing, building on what Paddy said, I think something that is really working in our favor is that we are all volunteers. I mean, people on the ground knows that none of us is earning any money. We're just investing all the time, all our time for free. So I think it's very important to keep that volunteering element, even if one day we employ somebody. But actually, the volunteering it's very important, and we should measure it actually, because it's a lot of time that we invest.
Thank you for bringing that in, because I think often that is not valued in terms of financial value, but I think we should put value on it because it shows then. Nick, do you have something you would like to?
No, just to say that, I think one of the things I think that diaspora organizations need to be careful about, and diasporas in general, there can be a sort of paternalistic element to it. People who are doing the helping tend to be better off than those who need help. And it's really that kind of dynamic can be quite negative, I guess, and one has to be super aware of it. And that's why I'm so much in favor of some systematic approach, or a more systematic approach to finding out what people think, rather than just depending on your great relationship. I remember talking to someone 10 years ago from a large international organization which has refugees in its name, saying, no, we don't need to do this stuff because we talk to people. We go around and we talk to people. And one has to recognize that just talking to people is not enough. And one needs to do these things in a way that gives people an opportunity to raise things, even if they are feeling a little bit intimidated, or they're very grateful, or whatever the emotion is. One needs to make sure these opportunities exist. And just to come back on something you were saying, Smriti, I run a small organization. I think we're 30 people or something. We have an ombudsman. We have a line to call people on the board if people don't feel satisfied by the ombudsman. This is a tiny organization, but we need all of us to have the mechanisms in place to allow people to cry out if they feel they need to.
Great, thank you. So I would like to now open the floor to the audience. Please raise your questions and make sure you tell us your name, your organization, and who you would like to put the question to. That'd be helpful, please. Yes.
Hello. That was loud. Hello, everyone. My name is Omar Haidari. I'm representing ASELAP here. My question is directed to Paddy and Lars. Regarding the trust building or trust earning among the diaspora and locals. I think in some way we, as international organizations and diaspora organizations, contribute to the obstacles in the way of that trust building or trust earning. For example, diaspora organizations works in healthcare or providing education support or clean water. They have to go there, they have to spend a certain amount of money or have space instead of using the resources that is in the locals or even using the expertise from outside, bringing them. It's very costly. So, or for just another example, just the video that we saw earlier in SWAT, community building. She said that we go there at least once every 3 months, and sometimes we take 2, 3 other donors of us to show them that where the donation goes. So the usage, like, if we cannot trust the expertise and the people's knowledge and local understanding in Afghanistan or in the country of origin, I'm talking from, because I'm from Afghanistan, we have seen international organizations bringing the diasporas and using their expertise with a lot more expensive and costly ways rather than using the expertise available on the ground. Or somebody opening a small dam but spending $2,000 to travel to Afghanistan to see and do the opening, while that could create or maybe open another, like provide clean water for another 1,000 people. How can we trust them first in order to allow them to trust us or earn their trust?
Great, thank you. Another question, please. Paddy.
Thank you for the panelists. It's interesting. My question, sorry, it's Fadi Al-Dairi from Hand in Hand for Aid and Development. My question would be to Cinzia and Paddy. You talked about volunteering. I mean, humanitarians should be, or diaspora should be volunteering primarily. We have examples in Syria, and we keep mentioning it to our Ukrainian friends, is you should be more than just volunteers. I know Omar mentioned earlier about the visits by the SWAT. It's every few months. What you should be doing is more engagement. When you go and talk, advocacy is key, and we often tend to not to focus on advocacy. And by you going to the field and coming back and talking about what you saw is an experience in itself, is a great effort. So, but more engagement, I think, is what we need to see. It's not just like be a volunteer that goes every few months. We should be hands-on, in my view. Thank you.
At the front row here. Just this lady here.
Hi, good afternoon. Sure, good. Hi, my name is Mark Fred from Haiti Winnow Alliance, One Diaspora in Washington, D.C. So I have 2 quick questions. The first one is for Cinzia. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience working with the local authorities? Because too often, cooperation with central government is very challenging, very difficult. So what is the lesson learned there? And my second one is for anyone in the panel. I'd like to hear your opinion on why is it difficult for NGOs in the field, when I mean by larger NGOs, with big purse NGOs, to work with organizations in the diaspora, or even local organization. Why is that? Is it because the politics or the politics of money? So what is it exactly? I'd like to hear your opinion on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think let's take that many and then go to the next round. So Paddy and Cinzia, I think you had a couple of things and then the whole panel.
I probably could start, and I think the last question is sort of also connected to the first question around trust building. I think one of the reasons why local organizations and diaspora may not work together is because there's some issues of trust. And that trust building, just because there is a crisis, doesn't often mean that the trust is immediately established. So that there is still a lot of work that would have had to happen. But I think that there could be also, like you have already almost responded, the politics of money, the politics of who is involved, the politics of power as well. And I think in the experiences that I have seen, as well, it's about who is engaged. In some countries, you've got regional politics, or you've got people who belong to one part of the region wanting development in their part of the region. You've got also religious group splittings. There could be a diversity of reason, but I often think that at some point there is a melting point, and I think it's always very important to look out for champions, because even in spaces where there's been so much conflict, there are a couple of champions who are ready to move the particular crisis forward, to move the particular problem forward. And you may not be able to move with the entire ecosystem, but 2 or 3 moving forward is sort of a way of showing how do we bridge some of the differences that we have to the extent possible to deal with the crisis at hand. But then I think that also answers the first question on trust building. And I think it's these incremental steps. Who on each side of the place where trust needs to be built is ready to step forward and leave their cards down? Who is willing to compromise? Some of the bigger concerns that diaspora, or is it working with local government, or is it working with local organizations as your question? But I think one of the issues that diaspora may have in relation to trust building and working with local organizations, at JRFDT, we have done quite a lot of conversations around trust building together with other partners, ICMPD, as well as working with them on whether it's global diaspora engagements as well. And this often comes out, but the unpacking, I think, is not something that can be solved on a global stage. It's something that really goes down to the issue at hand. And sometimes it's about the crisis at hand. And that local expertise that is required, the design of, this is the problem at hand, this is the capacity that is there at the local side. So the communication of who is available on the local side, who is available from the diaspora to support, is often very important. And I think we've seen in spaces where local organizations would say, well, thank you very much for wanting to bring in extra expertise on whatever kind of solution you have. But actually here, we have all the nurses who understand this issue. The nurses in the UK, they may understand the issue as it is, but you don't understand what the local context is here. So we would like a finer balance of things. So I think that whole honesty, the brokering of honesty, becomes very, very important in setting that. And I think that the last question on voluntarism, and I'll end it there, I agree with you. It has to be more than that. And the voluntarism, I think, is pushed by advocacy in most of ways. I think that's what takes it long term. At least also in my own personal experience, that if it's something I was very passionate about, I see myself ending in the long term, which is sometimes, I'm not so much for formalization, because I think formalization can take a lot of way of passion. So there is some things that need to be formalized, and there are some things I think that need to remain in that organic form so that it pushes advocacy and voluntarism sort of, we can thrive and really see what benefits come out of it for diaspora engagement.
Thank you, Cinzia.
So, well, to the question of, more engagement on the ground, we have people on the ground that those are the ones who, are in touch with what's happening. And frankly, the medical sector in Venezuela used to be best in class in Latin America. Doctors and nurses there have nothing to envy, from doctors and nurses here. It's just, we know that, and they know that we know. So let's say in that sense, the engagement on the ground works for that. We are thinking about actually, because we want to reinforce our governance, let's put it that way, on the ground, we are thinking about hiring somebody, but for now, we still are just volunteers. And, of course, I don't know the exact needs of the person in the hospital, in the little village. We don't know it, but we do our best efforts. For example, when we have to distribute medical supplies, we first send a survey and we ask, what do you need? So we try, but of course, it's, can be improved. About the local authority, well, the trust is built with time and, lot of difficulties, to be quite honest. And so, at some point, so we had to do it, again, it's like a tango. One thing that we did is to make sure that the other part understood that we were completely apolitical. So one exercise or one discipline that we have as the members of the board and volunteers, our social media are clean, zero political content, okay? So when we post things, we never say, 2 babies die in this hospital because the water, because of the hospital. we don't blame the government. We just say, this is the problem, this is the solution. So over time, and now it's word of mouth. So we got a phone call from a hospital, an oncological hospital. He say, I know you're doing a great job. Could you please help me with a blood bank? And so, but this is something that has been going on for many, many years. And sometimes throughout these years, we had to step back. So there was a period where there was a lot of repression against NGOs. So we, for example, erased from our website the people that we have on the ground, so they wouldn't be at risk, because some of them had been prosecuted, jailed, and so we just erased their pictures, names, etc. So we're kind of very low profile there. But it's a constant work, and really, I think it's, people can perceive what your agenda is. If your agenda is authentic, they can forget that you are a political opponent at the end. And the thing about money and finance of, and the trust, what we have been trying to do, imagine this, Venezuela, right? Venezuela is sanctioned, up to its neck, like at the level of Iran, North Korea, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, severe, really serious sanctions, Cuba, and so on. So what we try to do is, how do we respond to our donors who are in the UK? So what we did, we built a board that has been very lucky to get the head of the former head of the NHS to be one of our patrons. Then we over-report. So for example, the Charity Commission requests us to report once a year. We report twice a year. Every 3 months we send newsletters. So we applied to awards and we won several prizes for transparency, best practices, blah, 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 and all that stuff. So at the same effort that we put in governance on the ground, and we try to put it on having a transparency for our donors. And it needs to be an extra work because it's Venezuela. You cannot even open a bank account with the name Healing Venezuela. So strict are the sanctions. So we need to do more than that. But I think it's very important to give the tranquility to our donors that we're really trying to do our best to spend the money that they very generously give us.
Great, thank you. So I wanted to throw this question to Lars and Nick. You've been working in the system for a long time. That question about why is it that the international actors don't want to work with local organization and diaspora. Some thoughts from you, Niels?
We are having two conversations, really. Right? On the one side, we're talking about the tango and the bridge and the hospital and the wonderful, powerful, very strong stories coming out from your experience in engaging in Venezuela and in Zambia. But on the other hand, we are talking about large-scale bureaucracies who process billions